Oh yes, it's so nice to be here with you all. Truly, truly. A Merry Christmas to everyone who celebrates Christmas. A happy solstice um, as well. So a couple of quick announcements before I forget, if I can pull them up here. So I will be doing a meditation this Wednesday night. Normally I do it on Zoom, but this Wednesday I'm going to be offering it on Facebook Live. And I just thought I'd mix it up a little bit and offer it for free this time. The normal Zoom group that meets on Wednesday nights, you can join it. It just costs $1 to get in the door. And the reason I did that is because I want people to stay for the whole time. So this Wednesday will be the 25th of December, here in the Western Hemisphere. And for those of you in Australia, it will be the 26th when I'll be broadcasting. But, I invite you to join us. And if you've never meditated with us as a group before, it's a beautiful thing. There's been about 20 of us getting together every week on Zoom. And so I thought I'd just open it up for Christmas and see who shows up and see if there's some folks out there who would rather be sitting in silence and experiencing the grace of God than maybe sitting down for a big turkey dinner with the whole family and the uncle, whoever, and Aunt Margaret. Sometimes families can be quite overwhelming and sometimes toxic. Sometimes I've met families who've jumped over the table and were at each other's throats before. And so, we have this idea here on planet Earth that during the holidays that everyone's supposed to get along and be kind. And sometimes it happens, but other times families, they don't, they kind of repeat the same, the same song and dance that they've done in the past. And of course, for those of you who are alone and not even needing to avoid another Christmas dinner, please join us. Please join us. It's a lovely way to come together. For many years, I met with my teacher just every Wednesday night. And, even on Christmas, we'd come together. And it was just a wonderful time, a truly special time. Because you feel this presence of grace in such a strong and profound way. And so I'm just putting it out there. Wednesday the 25th. So the other thing is, I just like to say a big thank you to everyone for your generous donations this holiday season. That's been very kind of you, and it's really supporting the Sangha and the technology. I just put another considerable investment into technology in the last month or so, and so it's very helpful, so I can continue to offer these classes online. So thank you truly, truly so much. The next thing is tonight's topic. So I thought I'd continue with the topic of this universal Christ. And one of the things, one of the people I've been studying is the work of Richard Rohr. And I got this lovely book. Let's see if I can find it here. It's called The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. And I've deeply been enjoying it because, in a real sense, he's saying so much of what I've thought. Ever since I was a little kid, I came into this world and I had a deep love for Christ, for God, deep love for Jesus, the person, the master. But, in the book, one of the things Richard Rohr does is he really separates Jesus from the Christ. That Christ is in everything. So in Genesis, when God created the world, God said it was good. All of it was good. All of creation was good. And so as soon as God came into matter, and showed up as manifest life, this is the energy of the Christ, this indwelling, radiant presence. The Buddha may call it our inherent goodness, our inherent luminosity. And of course, you don't have to be a Christian to experience this. You don't have to be Christian, from the Christian tribe or the Christian religion. But from the perspective that Father Richard Rohr is teaching, that everyone is Christian, everyone is Christ. Everyone, everything is Christ. And my teacher, he used to play this game with me where he'd give me this mantra, and the mantra was really simple. It's, this too is God. So whatever your eyes gaze upon, this too is God. And it's a beautiful practice to do when you're in public. And so this morning, we had a really hard time, like we always do, getting out the door with our 5-year-old. She does a great job of slowing us down, and I can humble myself in this moment and say, I think I was the one slowing the ship down this morning. I was just flooded with all this grace and kundalini energy this morning. So sometimes when God comes to me in such a full way, I have trouble functioning. And so between me and the 5-year-old, we got a late start, leaving the house. And so we showed up to church, and church was jam-packed. It's Christmas season, so people are showing up to church again. And there's no real seats for us, and so I just kept walking. Sometimes there's some seats up front because people are scared to be that close, to the altar, to all the action. And so I saw, oh, look, there's some seats, right up in the front row. And so, as we sat there in the front row, and, after I had received communion, there's a little traffic jam when you sit up front because everyone walks right by you. And I just played with this mantra. This too is God. This too. And I saw all different kinds of, funny looking human beings. I mean, we're all kind of funny looking, big and small and tall and wide and, super skinny, and, people with long, wild hair and no hair at all, and all the different outfits and colors and ages and, genders and this and that. But as each person, as each character walked by, I just played with this gentle mantra. This too is God. And more as I said it, my heart would just smiled as I was seeing the Christ in each of these beings, the radiance, the aliveness, the divinity. Just in the moment when my heart was really on fire with this deep sense of love, I had gotten my daughter this little toy this morning. It's called a Hatchable, and basically it was like an egg carton with 12 little, I don't even know what they are, just little different animals that showed up in an egg, and you kind of crack the egg and out comes the little animal. And at church, there's a little girl, she doesn't know what's going on, so I give her a toy to play with. And all of a sudden, she took her toy and, just being a little girl, she just dropped it right there. And there must have been, 55 pieces. And I just smiled and said, oh, yes, this too is the energy of the Christ. This too is God. This too. Whereas, a parent could have been yelling at their kid or smacking them or You're not supposed to be messing around in church. But the Christ, it comes with this goodness, this innocence, this humility. And it's such a lovely experience to see life through the lens of our inherent divinity, our innate goodness. Now, I was reading in this book here about this teaching on the original sin. It came forward by St. Augustine. This will be a funny thing to say in the sentence where I say St. Augustine came up with the idea of original sin. It wasn't Jesus's idea. It wasn't the idea of the Christ, the indwelling Christ. The idea of God is all of creation is good. But sometimes even a saint can become confused. And he creates some idea, some theological idea, and he was a brilliant one, Augustine. But sometimes brilliant people have terrible ideas. And so this idea was planted in the church that we are somehow inherently bad, that we're wrong, that we've come into this world dirty and defiled. And we must earn our Christian nature. We must earn our divinity. And this is, boy, what a great mistake, a great misperception, a great sin. To use the word sin, meaning confusion. A great confusion Augustine had, to think that our fellow human beings they're originally wrong. God's teaches us, shows us that we are originally good, wholesome, complete, divine. But human beings, we won't be too hard on Augustine because we all get confused. And there must have been something in the nature of the human psyche that gravitates towards criticizing oneself or criticizing others, just seeing the bad instead of seeing the good. And so the energy of the Christ is that which can see the good, that can see absolute divinity, and can feel and experience the presence of God. Even when we make a mistake, we fall on our face. The energy of the Christ is an energy which is rejuvenating and helps us to rise again. Rise again, even after something as crazy as being nailed to the cross. I'd like to read a couple lines from this book. And, one of the things that I like is, it's not like a heavily, how shall I say this? Well, I'll just read what I was going to read here. Richard brings in the story of Eddie Hilsum. I could be pronouncing her last name wrong. Eddie Hilsum. She was a Jewish lady who lived in the time of Nazi Germany, and she ended up being killed in Auschwitz. But let me just read, this quote that Richard Rohr brought forward in his book. And this is her speaking about, this great truth that she's realized in your heart. This truth of forgiveness, this truth that God is here, this deep and profound truth. She said, in spite of everything, you always end up with the same conviction. Life is good after all. It's not God's fault that things go awry sometimes. The cause lies in ourselves. That I'll just clarify that. The cause lies in ourselves. We get confused here as human beings, like the Nazis, greatly confused individuals, greatly confused. You have to be seriously confused, mentally ill in a deep sense, to slaughter so many people. And that's what stays with me, even now, when I'm about to be packed off to Poland. That's where Auschwitz is, with my whole family. So here she is. She's staying with this quiet truth that the heart is good. The heart is the indwelling Christ. She even writes, further, alas, there doesn't seem to be much you yourself, she's referring to God, can do about our circumstances and our lives. Neither do I hold you responsible. You cannot help us, but we must help you and defend your dwelling place inside us to the last. So here is someone, again, who's realized the Christ within herself. And she's saying her job is to defend the Christ, to be connected to this Christ-like energy, this inner truth, this inner love, and not fall prey even when one feels abandoned by God. She goes on to write, while she's locked up in a concentration camp, those 2 months behind barbed wire have been the 2 richest and most immense months of my life, in which my highest values were so deeply confirmed. I have learned to love Westerbork. Westerbork was it was like one of those concentration camps where they're just moving you, from one place to the next. It's the last stop before Auschwitz. And here she is, deeply and profoundly connected to her true nature. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes. Someone so deeply connected to their Christ-like nature. And she's feeling this divinity, this goodness. She's standing in her truth and her conviction that life is good. Despite the crazy Nazis, despite the hell that's around her. And see, the Christ is greater than everything, every experience. The Christ even shows up in hell itself. In hell itself. The Christ can have what she describes an immense and rich experience in a holding station, a concentration camp. It was so utterly inspiring and so just terrifying at the same time. Life here on planet Earth, but when we connect with this Christ-like energy, it gives us an anchor to become rooted in something profound, something non-dual. It would be easy, a different fella, what was his name? And I could butcher his name too. Was it Elie Wiesel? He was in the concentration camps, and he looked up at God and said, "Where the hell are you?" Like, where the hell are you? And I think he had a moment where he had lost, complete and utter faith. That'd be a normal response. A normal response, for most human beings in such a horrific circumstance. I saw him later in life when he was quite old, and he spent his life teaching and sharing a sense of hope. And so he reconnected with the Christ. The Christ is what outlived that terrifying experience. He didn't come out of there a broken man. Ego, yeah, deeply harmed, deeply hurt, his humanity, his body. But when I saw him speak, he had tremendous hope. Tremendous hope. And this is what he was teaching. A greater life for humanity. So we don't repeat the sins of our fathers. And it's always an inspiring thing when you hear someone who lives through utter hell. And we all go through our own little hells, but when people live through a hell like that, it's like, and some people die there. but they die and then they rise again. They are resurrected like we'll all be. Wind up in the next realm, the next truth, the next truth. And see, many times on the path, I work with folks and they're in complete and utter pain. They're struggling with immense emotional suffering, mental suffering, relationshipal suffering, with its broken heart, or, they lived in a household where they were abused for decades of their life. But it's this Christ that can help us wake up again in the morning. It's the energy where we can smile again and say yes. Where we continue to see beauty everywhere, despite the hellish experience we went through. Whatever it is, we don't have to go through a concentration camp. My God. But all of us, we've lived through something great. And it's a good question is, what is that? What is it that lives through the pain, the sadness, the heartache, the despair? What is it? Like, what is it within me? Like, what is this presence? Can I get to know this? And of course, it doesn't matter if you call it the indwelling Christ, the universal Christ. For good Zen guys, for Zen gals, we call it Buddha nature. Buddha nature. Some people just call it true nature. Some people call it the self. Other people want to call it the no self. And, all these silly terms. And again, these names never, they never stuck with me. I never worried about guarding them, defending them. What's important is that we have this direct experience of this direct experience. Here in Durango, I do this fun thing where I've joined a men's group, just like a Catholic men's group of all things. And this is another way to connect with some of the fathers at my daughter's school. And it's good because I get to be a nobody there. I don't have to be a spiritual teacher. But, some of the guys in the group, they really connect to the dogma of the Catholic religion, the church, what the church says, this and that. And, I'm always the one saying, like, I don't care about the dogma at all. I've always been an experienced guy. Ever since I was a kid, as I wanted to have the ultimate experience. The ultimate experience of connection, of union, of communion with God. That's what's driven me on this path. That's what's kept me on this path. That's what has given me patience. So many individuals, they come on this path and it's interesting. They want the whole thing right away and they have no patience, none. And that's often because we're in immense suffering. When we're in immense suffering, we normally don't have much patience, and acknowledge that, the path often is 2 steps forward and then 1 back. It's 2 forward, then 1 back. And after we've lived for a long time on this spiritual path, we can smile. We take 2 steps forward, and when we take 1 step back, in the beginning, you criticize yourself. Gosh, I can't believe I did that. I'm such an idiot. I'm a fool, or whatever. However we criticize ourselves, I'll never make it, But the longer and the further we mature, we may take 2 steps forward and then 2 steps back, and we don't criticize ourselves at all. We smile because the Christ is here within us. This divinity is here within us. And we also realize I have this human body. I always look at the human body like I have this silly human body and this silly human mind and this silly human emotional nature. And I have my whole father's psychology inside of me and my mother's psychological nature inside of me. And They're ancestors in me, and I have the psychology of the species, within me. And so to criticize oneself too harshly, it's at some point, the more you wake up, you realize God created this world in all its beauty and its glory and divinity and magnificence. But God created this world also in all its humanity and the animal nature, the destructiveness and the chaos and the hell and the divisiveness and greed and anger and violence. God created an evolutionary world. The Christ is the energy that withstands evolution. It outlives, in a sense, evolution. Outlives it. It's a thing that's always willing to take the next step. And so the Christ is one with evolution and simultaneously outlives it, which is a great paradox to try to wrap your mind around that. And when you know that, when you have faith in what you are, what everyone is, it becomes much easier to forgive oneself and to forgive others for our confusion. It becomes much easier. Being a human being is no doubt a frustrating experience, to say the least. It's no doubt a frustrating experience. I had a funny experience, just the other day. This was this whole weekend. I've just been really overwhelmed with grace, and Friday night I had this big plan. I was going to go out to the desert and spend some time in silence and have a ritual, like a journey out there in the desert where I was going to, really drop in deep. And big plan all set up, and it's been pretty cold here in the Southwest. So I was all geared up, got the car all loaded up. I wasn't gonna camp out Friday night because it's pretty cold, and so I got the car loaded up, and come Saturday morning, I get up pretty early at 5 or 5:36, and normally on a day like that, I would just be ready to run, get out and hop in the car and see the sunrise. But this day, the presence of God just came so fully into me, and I just felt this magnet that just kept me in bed. It wasn't laziness in any way. It's really hard for me to lay in bed for long periods of time. If I lay in bed, till 7 a.m., I do that maybe once every 3 months, I'll make it to 7. And I just felt this magnet just holding my spine to the bed. And just this rush of kundalini, this rush of energy was flooding my being. And I kept saying, okay, just a couple more minutes and then I'll leave. And hell, this day, I didn't make it to the end of the block, My wife looked at me, she said, "When are you going? Aren't you going to go?" And so it's important that we're patient on the path. Like, you never know what God has in store for you. You just don't know. You may have a great plan, a beautiful intention. The funny thing for the ego is when we have a beautiful intention, a spiritual intention, and then God has a different plan. God heard me say, I want to take this day and I want to dive deep. God said, okay, let me flood you with grace right now. Right now. You're not even going to make it out of the house. Hell, I could barely form a sentence for the first 4 hours of the day on Saturday. I had so much light moving through my body. And it's just an interesting thing, this path. You never know what God has in store for you. Sometimes she will come in the form of unimaginable grace. At other times, you'll wake up and you'll just be in the void, where you'll feel there is no God, no thing, nothing. Nothing. And yet, is there not this silent presence of awareness that's witnessing the void? And see, this too is the Christ. The Christ is this presence that can witness, that experiences, that is alive. Whether we're in the void or we're flooded with grace, whether our kids are driving us nuts, or our boyfriend or girlfriend, or we're struggling with addiction, the Christ is that which outlives the addiction. That which outlives, that which brings you to AA. Or MA, or whatever the other A's are. SA, Trying to think if I know some of the A's, but the 12-step programs. The 12-step programs. The Christ is the thing that says, hey, why don't you get some help, some support along the way? And so, I could probably go on and on with this, but let me just scan the questions. And for those of you on Zoom, I'm having trouble with the chat, but if anyone has a question, you can put it in the chat. If you wanted to speak to me, you're also welcome to write that in the chat or wave at me or get my attention, and I will, and we can talk then. But I'm here if you have a question. There's one question I have that came in through email that I'll get to real quick. This is from Jonas, and Jonas lives up there in Northern Europe. So Jonas writes, "Hi Craig, as you know, I've spent a long time fully dedicating my life to introspective work," and he really has. He had to stop working and just go inward for many years now. I've been waiting for quite some time for God / life to call me back to external reality, to once again engage and contribute to the outer realm, as it were. I start to feel that perhaps I cannot wait any longer. However, it is incredibly hard to move without the expected divine invitation or without the usual egoic juice. So I feel lost, and the remaining ego is quite upset. Can you speak to this issue, i.e. the movement back to life from a long period of refuge? Yeah, that's a beautiful question, Jonas. So this is a common thing, and I'll just call it, say, priming the pump. When we've spent many years in retreat and doing introspective work, one of the things that happens is, of course, the ego has at least begun to dissolve. In your case, it is deeply dissolved. And one of the things that most of us don't realize, we're unconscious of this, is that the ego drives the way we show up here on planet Earth. It drives a big portion of our ego is the will, the human will. And the will is, what gets us to work, to do a good job, to vote, to show up, to do whatever. And as the human will fades, we go through this period of, I'll call it a void. It's a different kind of void than like the absolute void, but the ego can go through this void period where the egoic will falls away, and then we're just waiting for the divine will to come online. Now, the beautiful thing about this world is, unless we have an enormous trust fund, many of us on the spiritual path will go through this where we just have to jump back into life for the sole practical reason of I have to make some money. I have to pay the bills. I have to pay the bills. You have to pay rent to live on planet Earth, as one of my old climbing friends told me. You have to pay rent to live on planet Earth. Most people see this as a ridiculous inconvenience, especially at this stage of the journey where you're at. There's this spiritual teaching, well, just sit there and wait and don't do anything until God speaks through you, acts through you, till you hear the voice of God leading you. And that's a beautiful teaching. And practically, it's wonderful if you have millions of dollars in the bank. But for those of us who don't, just to ask, well, what is God trying to show me here? We live in a world with causes and conditions, is what the Buddha says. So we must respect these causes and conditions. We must show up. And so sometimes it's through just getting off the couch and getting back to work. That only then that we discover the manifest truth. So Jonas, you have obviously discovered the indwelling truth that all is God. The divine is everywhere. The Christ is everywhere. But can you humble yourself enough to step forward into life with no plan? With no plan. Can you step forward into life with no plan? Can you take a leap of faith and see what starts coming forward? And if there's a question of the who, what, when, where, and why, those questions, if you're not getting a clear answer from the divine in the voice of your heart, you simply do what's wise. You do what's wise. I had a very funny experience with this as my human egoic will fell away. I knew my job was to teach. I mean, hell, my teacher spent, 2 decades training me to teach. I just knew in my heart that was my job to do. And, I started teaching, but for most of us, when we start teaching, there's no real money in it, You might spend, rent a room for $45 and maybe 3 people show up and you make $30 or whatever it is. So I taught for many years where, I was just losing lots of money with teaching. And so I just had to go out and just do whatever God gave me. And I did all kinds of things. The funniest, not the funnest, but the funniest job I had was, I was a maid for someone. Like I cleaned a millionaire's home. She had me show up 5 days a week. And she would yell at me because I used the wrong vacuum stairs. There's a vacuum cleaner. There's a vacuum cleaner for the upstairs and for the downstairs. She had me dusting all of her gems and her... She had these 2 dogs that had so much fur. And I was like, dude, let's clean up after these dogs. And I'd look at God and say, what the hell? This is what you have me doing, is cleaning someone's house. You have flooded me with grace. You have given me such a great teacher. I've been trained well, and this is what you've given me. And it was another way that God could break down my ego, a different aspect of my ego that I thought had faded away, but had obviously not. After that, she sent me out in the fields, and I baled hay for her. I can remember just walking out in the field and picking up these heavy bales and just being flooded with all this energy and just hanging out with some kind of, I'll just say like redneck kind of folks. And I say that with a smile because I've had a redneck before. I am from Kentucky, and so I know how to hang with those fellas. But I can remember just hanging out with these really rough guys, and And there's this one moment where there was a snake. A lot of times snakes get caught in the bailing machine. And after a snake is dead, like a snake can get ripped to parts. I'll just say something gruesome here. A snake can be ripped to pieces, and their body can still be like squirming around like all wild. And I can remember just walking up to this bale, and it had just a piece of a snake, and it was just squirming all around, all dead. The nerves just going wild even after it's dead. I don't know how that works, but it's a thing. And just having this moment of absolute grace and seeing this brutality and just looking at God saying, what the hell? Like, what are you doing with me? And it made absolute no sense to me. I had children I had to feed. I was completely broke. I was absolutely in debt. I mean, hell, I'm still paying off the debt that I got in from those years. And just this dead snake all mangled up in this bale of hay. While my body was flooded with grace and light. I felt the hugeness of this blue sky. I said, God, this is what you have for me to do here on planet Earth, is to pick up this damn bale. And I was just furious. And I realized, at some point, God is still teaching me more. God is showing me how to be in the world with gratitude, with humility. And so I wasn't ready to fully go forward, to offer what I was offering, until God first made me a maid and a ranch hand, and among other things, concrete labor. I pushed wheelbarrows and laid sod and all kinds of stuff that really humbled me. And it was good. I can see now it was brilliant what God was doing in the moment. There are still aspects of my ego which were furious. Okay, here's a question from Lisa. Let's see here. When I heard you saying step into life without a plan, I felt immediately that is what I've been doing for over a year. And it keeps bringing me to silence, meditation, and long periods of being alone. Good. Though I do feel connected to the highest good. I don't have the urge to do or show or teach, just pray in silence for the all. Pray and meditate in the depth. Am I frozen or blocked in the midst of these? So, Lisa, the way we know we're frozen is if our heart feels dead, or if we are drawn into meditation out of fear of this world. Fear or habit. And so let me speak about that. So because I'm mixing up two questions, like with Jonas, Jonas here. When we've had a long habit of just going inward, oftentimes it's hard to get out of that habit. Human beings are habitual creatures. Spiritual people are deeply habitual, even though in theory, when we are free of habit, our habitual way of being. But we can develop a habit of meditation and just never want to stop meditation. And so at some point, God pushes us into the world. And sometimes she pushes us into the world through emptying our bank account. And so, we just have to face this truth that God is pushing us into the world. And then we have to just do what's practical. And you'll know when the truth, when everything comes together, but it normally doesn't come together the way we think it does. People oftentimes cite folks like Ramana Maharshi or Eckhart Tolle. Well, they had this grand experience and then they started teaching. In Ramana's case, they just built an ashram around him. And Eckhart Tolle, he had this awakening, and then he's a superstar spiritual teacher. Normally, it doesn't work that way. And I think if you sat down and really questioned them, you'll realize it didn't really work that way with those two either. I mean, Ramana had a very brutal transition. If you study his life, brutal transition. And by that, I mean, from the time he left home until, when he had an ashram built up around him, he spent many, many years in caves and darkness and, facing hellish states of being and having incredible difficulties with his body and malnutrition and this and that, and his family attacking him and harassing him and begging him to stop doing what he's doing and all kinds of stuff. But with you, Lisa, you asked, am I frozen? Well, not necessarily. Sometimes we're meant just to go inward for years. And again, it's good to ask, am I meditating out of habit? Is there any avoidance of life that's happening within me? And we normally know when we're avoiding life. Is there something within us that we know that we're avoiding? Something else we know, like one of my teachers, Ajay, says that we don't want to know. Like we know it, but we don't want to know it. Like we kind of ignore it or we push it in the shadow and just say, oh yeah, I'll just meditate and pray and be in silence. I mean, hell, being in silence is a hell of a lot easier than being in this world. It's a lot easier to be in silence. For some people not, but for most spiritual people, it's easier to sit and meditate, do yoga, make yourself a nice warm bubble bath with essential oils or whatever it is, then go to work, go to job, face the family, the Christmas dinner. For some of us, Christmas dinner, for spiritual people, they find, oh, I'm not very spiritual. I can't even be kind. I can't forgive, someone for something that happened 25 years ago. For something that happened 25 years ago. Many spiritual people just avoid life. And so it's good just to ask, is my spirituality, is my practice driven by avoidance, by habit, or by truth? Now, in truth, yes, spiritual practice feels good, but are we practicing in a way where we are avoiding life? I've had kids for so many years, and kids, they don't let you get away with avoiding, and so they're great teachers. They help you keep 2 feet on the ground. And so anyways, it's a great question. And so when you're frozen in your heart will feel kind of dead, and it'll feel like we're just kind of superficially practicing. Or the other thing that happens is we can practice a lot, and if our heart is frozen, the practice will stop working. So a fun thing I see is, and I see this sometimes when I teach at a Buddhist place, is you'll see these old guys and they're meditating. They've been meditating for 30 years and they're just falling asleep the whole time. And that's normally because there's something in their heart that they're avoiding, and they're just trying to meditate it away and make it disappear and go to some transcendent place and avoid their life. And when you avoid life, you tend to fall asleep a lot in meditation. It's either that or our experience isn't broad enough. It's not inclusive enough. It's one of the big reasons we fall asleep. And so just play with that a little bit and just see, is there something inside that we're avoiding? Okay, cool. Let me see here. Here's a question from Miss Sterling here. Craig, can you put a screenshot of what you're reading on your Facebook page? Immensely powerful. Yeah, I will just say it again. It's The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. And I will see if I can do a screenshot of that one way or another. I might have to work with my technological skills, but I bet you I can pull that off. I'll see if I can put that forward in a Facebook post. Okay, beautiful. So, Mr. Wesley from the wild and crazy, what we call it, Albuquerque, has a question for me. Mr. Wesley, are you here somewhere?
Yes. Can you hear me?
There you are. Yeah.
Yeah, and Richard Rohr, that's a great top. He's here in Albuquerque.
Yeah, he's one of your neighbors. I think, what's this place called? The Center for Contemplative Action or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, great resource down there. So what's your question, Wesley?
Well, I relate to what you're talking about. I appreciate the topic, the Christ within, the universal Christ. The way I relate to it, I think, is as awareness, I guess, pure awareness, pure consciousness.
Yes.
And from that, I've been just struck freshly with different, I guess, aphorisms or sayings that have kind of taken on a new dimension, or there's I'm seeing them in a new light lately, and I wanted to offer two up and see if you had any reflection. One is, both of them are attributed to Jesus. I think this one's from the Book of John. I should check, I'm not sure, but there's the quote about, "I am the light of the world."
Yeah.
And that's, I was even thinking that it could be, "I am is the light of the world," or
yeah,
"the world is the light of I am." I was thinking about it in some different ways.
And that's the proper translation, the way you're saying it. The improper thing is to think that Jesus said that about himself. And anyone who knew Jesus or truly read the Bible and studied the Bible sees that he always puts it, always gives the credit to God and doesn't take it on himself. And so, yeah. And what's the second one?
The other one I wanted to just mention and see what you think is there's a loose paraphrasing. I don't remember how it's said actually, but something like, "Unless you become as little children, cannot enter the kingdom of God," something like that.
Yeah.
And to me, that's also kind of getting back to just that pure space of consciousness, the way I'm hearing it anyways, before the concepts and thoughts, complications of the mind.
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Wesley. It's so true. And that's the humility. And that's one of the things that, I love that Jesus taught about so much was humility. And of course, anytime there's a religion that comes forward after the fact, everyone does a pretty bad job of butchering, the truth that whatever the master was, who brought something great. And because, the shadow side of humility is this false humility, and I struggled with that for many years, where I thought I had to be poor and I thought I had to be less than, and it just fed into the egoic sense of unworthiness. And, that's, of course, is not what Christ was speaking about, or Jesus was speaking about. He was speaking about, in order to know God, in order to know the Christ, in order to know oneself, in order to know this presence, I am the light that you were describing, we have to be radically humble. But unfortunately, many of us are radically egocentric. And we put ourselves above all else, and we put the importance of our thinking mind and our thoughts and our beliefs before God. And this is what Jesus is inviting us to humble. is our thoughts that we cherish so much or that we're so attached to, because sometimes we have terrible thoughts about ourselves or about the world. And, anytime you have a thought that is inherently negative, inherently harsh or exclusive, you put a wall between you and the Christ. You put a wall between you and the I am. You put a wall between you and your light. And so it just doesn't work, to bow before, the God of ego. We must bow before the God of truth, the God of love, the God of compassion first and foremost. And the bowing, that's what you're speaking about, Wes, is that's the being like a child. A child is, they're innocent. They know how to listen. They know how to listen. They know how to surrender. They know how to let go. Let go. They know that they're not the end all be all. And so that's a beautiful thing you brought forward. So thank you, Wes, for sharing. Let's see. I'll just see if there's some others. Here. Any advice for navigating an intimate relationship with someone who is not on a spiritual path? Yeah, that's a great question. I love this one. The more you get in touch with the consciousness of the inner Christ, you begin to see that everyone and everything is on the spiritual path. That God truly is non-dual. No one cannot be on the spiritual path. They can be not on the path in a conscious way. They can be not on the path. And I'm even going to bite my tongue about that, consciously. I think everyone knows they have a growing edge. Everyone knows they have work to do. Even if someone's arguing that, they don't have any work to do, they have a heart. God gave them a heart, and their heart knows that they're lying to themselves and lying to you. Everyone's on the path. They are. They are. Whether they like it or not. That's the beautiful thing about planet Earth is we all are, whether we know it or not. I will say this just from a practical perspective. I'll just say this as a marriage, a former marriage counselor. I did marriage counseling for a while. I was really good at it, but boy, is that a tough job. Be in a room with two people, trying to remind them that they love each other. It can be really helpful if our lives are aligned. You know what I mean? Just basic alignment. If we're talking about, me and you, we're going to live together and we're going to do this life together. I like to think of a partner as a teammate. It's important to have a similar lifestyle. I'm not saying it's completely and utterly necessary, but it's important. It's important. It just creates a much greater harmony. Let's say you are a fundamentalist Christian and your partner is a fundamentalist atheist. There's a good chance two of you are going to be doing this a lot, and you may be marrying each other in the fundamentalism, but those two are eventually going to destroy each other. Saturday Night Live did a hilarious skit last week about this couple in the United States. Folks in other countries may not get it, but it's Kellyanne Conway, who's like Trump's biggest fan. She works for him, or I don't know what her job is, but she's always in the press, like speaking about how great a job he's doing. And I'd call her his promotions director. That's what Kellyanne does. She does a lot of cleanup too after him. Her husband, I think just hates Trump's guts. And so the two of them have huge Twitter followings. And, the wife will say one thing about how great Trump is. And then, 3 seconds later, the husband will be on Twitter just saying what a fool he is. He's a narcissist. He's a diagnosable narcissist and this and that. And did they do a funny skit about what their home life is like, and it just has to be crazy, because both of them are publicly, attacking Kellyanne's boss and in huge ways and causing a lot of stir in politics in our country. But, it's just hard when you live with someone and we're not headed in the same, kind of sort of direction. We don't have to be both card-carrying Christians or Buddhist. Sometimes when we're in relationship with spiritual people, spiritual people can use spirituality to attack each other in like a spiritually bypassing and distorted, manipulative way. So I've seen that as well. So don't have the idea that if you marry a guy who's a yoga teacher and who's always, I'll say this, rubbing crystals, as my friends like to say, and smelling essential oils, that he's going to be just, like living with Jesus. We all have our growing edge. And so if you're with someone, I always like to ask the first question is, do you love the person? If this is first and foremost, if you love them fully, they love you fully, we are on the spiritual path together. We're on it together. If love is the reason we're here, like number one, top of the priority list, we are here because we love each other, then yeah, you're on the spiritual path together. It's nice when the outward paths align. It can be a total pain in the butt. Other people really make it work. Really make it work. The further you walk, though, the more you begin to see that everyone is on the path. But there are, hell, I could do a whole broadcast about this one. But let me just say this one last thing. Oftentimes in relationship, I just look at, are there big, red flags or what I call unworkables? Red flags, is the person an alcoholic? Are they addicted to meth? That's a fun one. Are they addicted to drugs or something crazy? These are unworkables. They're just unworkables. Is the person completely and utterly, totally unwilling to grow with you? They may love you, but if someone in the relationship is unwilling to fundamentally grow with you, and by that I mean go to counseling, go to therapy, read a book about a relationship, come to a spiritual class, or you go, you grow with them, whatever their thing is, then things just start to dry up. It's like throwing seeds on concrete. But again, that's a giant question. It's a good question though. All right, I'm just gonna, if everyone hang in there, just a couple questions came in right at the end, and I'll just see if I can do my best to answer them quickly. And in the future, I want to tell you all, give me the questions early, so I don't hold us all up at the end. I'm always supposed to speak for an hour here, but let's see. Here's one from Bryce. Hey, Bryce. Bryce, get a hold of me if you want to see me again. I know you tried to reach out last week, but get a hold of me again. Okay, how do you differentiate the voice of your inner critic from the voice of intuition? Things may be avoidance. I'm not sure what you mean by things may be avoidance, but it's real clear here. The inner critic will come with a harshness. Sometimes you'll feel like the criticism, it has a feeling of like an axe falling, a heavy axe falling in the space of your mind or the space of your heart. The voice of intuition will come, oftentimes it just feels like this gentle flow of truth. It'll just say something like this way or that way. I'll give you just a yes with a radiance or a no with a radiance. Intuition isn't going to close the door of your heart. So it's going to feel you lighthearted. So the no, like say, even for example, like say, oh, should I go on this spiritual retreat? This is a great idea. If the heart says no, it's not going to be like, no, it's not going to come with the harshness. It's just going to be like, no, like not right now, not right now. It's going to come with a softness. That's intuition. Criticism comes with harshness. So if you feel, if you just step into mindfulness, open your heart and feel the two different thoughts, the critic may say no with harshness. The heart may say no with lightheartedness. Like oftentimes when I ask, should I go somewhere? And it's a no, it's a soft no. It's not going to be a harsh no. That's not going to be the truth of my heart. Heart's not a harsh thing. Beautiful question, Bryce. Okay, here, one last question here. Craig, my family is born again Christian. All right, I'm born again. I have never had any really strong faith. My mom was very preachy. This turned me away from God. How do you deal with people like this? I'm afraid they are not going to accept who I'm becoming and what I believe now. Sarah, your parents, your mother, your family may not accept you, but can you fully accept you? Can you love you fully and completely? That's your job, is for you to love you fully and completely. When you fully accept yourself, you love yourself, and then when you're around, what I'll call good Christians, and I say that with a bit of sarcasm and a smile, join them in love. Join them in love. Do you take the one and only Jesus Christ, the Lord and Savior? Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't believe in one and only anything. God is not one and only. God is radically inclusive. The Christ is inclusive. Do not argue theology with them. Can you forgive your mother for being confused? Can you forgive her? That's a great question for you. Can you forgive her for being confused, for putting her confusion above her love for you? She should have put her love first, but she put her confusion first. And that happens here on planet Earth. How do you deal with people like this? You forgive them, and then you also set boundaries. So if they are fiercely judgmental and they're unhelpful for you in life, you set boundaries. If they're just kind of a pain in the butt, you forgive them and you show up with love. So thanks for that question at the end. Sarah, you shine your light. That's the job. That's how you become a true Christian. And by that, I mean a Christ being, is you connect with your Christ nature and you shine that in the world. That's your job. I think Jesus would be deeply upset if he ever thought anyone would put teachings, fundamentalist teachings before love. Love comes first. That's the highest teaching. Thank you all. Forgive me for going over. It's so nice to be with you. Wednesday night, meditation class on Facebook this week only. Christmas night, if you want to join us. Thank you all for your donations, your support, your humility. So much love to you all. So much love to you.